Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jess Lenore in Baltimore. Outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder recently announced an end to federal participation in the controversial practice of civil asset forfeiture. It allows local law enforcement to seize cars, money, and other property of individuals simply suspected of wrongdoing and often never even charged with a crime. Critics say the program, which has reportedly been used to seize billions, is used to target the poor and people of color who often don't have the resources to wage costly legal battles to reclaim their property. While the move has been widely praised in the media, it won't affect many of the states where state laws allow the practice to continue. Now joining us to discuss this is Glen Ford. He's the co-founder and executive editor of Black Agenda Report. Thank you so much for joining us, Glen.
Oh, thank you for the privilege of being here.
So Glen, the media coverage around this has widely praised the move. But as we know now, this won't affect the vast majority of instances where this has been used ever since the start of the drug war to confiscate money, cars, all types of other property from people crossing state lines just because they've been suspected of a crime. I wanted to quickly play a clip from HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. He did a hilarious and eye-opening segment where he featured clips of local law enforcement talking about why they stopped people whose property they had seized. Here's that clip.
Now this happened in Tennessee, a state where local law enforcement authorities are allowed to keep as much as 100% of the proceeds from civil forfeitures. A local news investigation found multiple troubling cases of people having money seized, such as George Reeby, who had $20,000 seized after he was stopped for speeding. The police officer argued it was drug money, despite the fact that Reeby had a pretty good explanation.
I told them I had active bids on eBay that I was trying to buy a vehicle, and they just didn't want to hear it.
In fact, Reeby had proof on his computer, but the Monterey officer drew up a damning affidavit citing his own training that common people do not carry this much U.S. currency.
And did he tell you that he was trying to buy a car?
He did.
But you did not include that in your report.
If it's not in there, I didn't put it in there.
So why would you leave that out?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? I expect a better answer from a police officer than a 4-year-old who just spilled grape juice on the couch. What happened to your drink? I don't know.
So Glen, what's your response? And talk about this practice, which often targets the poor and people of color, and has seized hundreds of millions of dollars from them over the last decades.
Well, it just goes to show you what came out of that mid-'80s crack cocaine hysteria, a true assault on civil liberties and an assault that was targeted mainly at Black and poor people. And it was not, it turns out, in practice, a war on drugs, as the John Oliver clip shows. It created instead a system of highway robbery by the police, a huge incentive for police corruption. Remember, under this program, the feds get 20% of the loot, and that's cash or cars or houses. It could be just about anything. The feds get 20%, and the cops get 80%. So there's a great incentive for the cops to accuse people of being drug dealers or some other kind of criminal. But ironically, and in fact, fantastically, it is often more profitable for the cops to confiscate property and then not bring charges against the person they're taking the property from, because it's harder under criminal law to seize property than it is under civil law. So the cops take the easy way out. They take the money, often don't bring charges, and then they essentially dare their victims to sue them. And you know how hard it is to sue a cop. It's very expensive. It's also sometimes pretty dangerous.
Glen, this goes back to the lack of accountability for law enforcement all over this country.
Well, sure, and in fact, what this really highlights is the role played by the federal government during the Reagan administration when they declared a crack cocaine emergency before, statistically speaking, there was such an emergency. They did so for political reasons, and the end result was to further corrupt the police. And in terms of the impact of Attorney General Holder's action or minimal action, more rhetoric, it appears, than substance. It essentially only affects 18 states, and those are the states that already had laws in effect that limited the police's ability to do this. In the other 42 states, the police can go on their merry way, confiscating and accusing as they like. In a big fraction of those states, the cops get to keep 100% of whatever they seize. In another segment of the states, the cops get to keep 50%, and some of the seized assets then go into the general fund of the states or into an educational fund and such. So what civil libertarians, now disappointed to find out that what Eric Holder seemed to indicate was very much not the case, but civil liberties advocates are now pushing for is some kind of national legislation, because you can't get at this intentionally imposed route of corruption state by state. There's got to be some kind of federal hand here.
Well, Glen Ford will certainly keep following this story. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.